So today I'm joined by Jess. What we'll be doing is walking through some of the notes that we took for MozCon, a conference that we both attended. We thought it would be a good example of how to think through taking permanent notes. It's not a process that I have fully fleshed out, but Jess is very new to Smart Notes and was curious how I went about it. And so that'll be the topic for today's video. I'll go ahead and share Obsidian. We'll take a look at what we have so far. So on the left, you see a literature note, and on the right, I have the very beginning of a permanent note. But before that, we'll kind of look at the day planner. So going back to the time blocking, I went ahead and I marked out all my calendars since I was attending the conference. I really didn't schedule any deep work sessions, obviously. So all the interesting topics that I had here are slotted to my time blocker, so I could use this to know when things were I didn't have to open up Outlook or anything like that. And then even before that, I kind of did some pre-planning where I looked at the agenda ahead of time and I just scoped out the sessions that I want and I put little fire emojis because those are cool next to the conversations or the talks that I thought would be most interesting. But this one, actually, the first one where I didn't think it was going to be super interesting was actually phenomenal.
That was really good, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll go back to that. Now, literature notes. Let me just expand this fully so we can see it. Basically, what I did is I just created a note for the talk, and I named the note the same thing as the talk, and then I linked it to the MozCon so I could have this navigational path. Because once you get, I think I have like close to 50 reference notes. Like I'll remember MozCon, but I won't remember the science of purchasing behavior. And so that's how I'm using that topic note, so to speak, to link to the other one so I have a navigation back, because you can't just browse in a file structure. But from a literature note, like a lot of people, they put metadata in front of it, and I might go and do that at some point. But what I did was I just created a note and I started taking notes. So I didn't prep any of this. This is just all that the raw notes that I took, whether, listening or ideas that came up during the conversation that I took while I was watching it. And so what I typically do after that is I come in here and I just review and I try to find out what's interesting. And so at the very beginning, I thought was really fascinating was this progression of marketing and how it changed its lens. So it started in the 1950s and 70s with like the how marketing, like how the product, basically describing the product, its price, its properties. And then in the 70s, it kind of switched to the image, around choice, like the different brandings of choice, different colors to fit different people. And then in the 90s, it moved to this why positioning of why you should use it. That's kind of where the taglines, like what we think of as like the Nike taglines kind of surfaced. And now, in starting like the 2010s, it's about emotion. It's about how it makes people feel, who's using the product. And really that all kind of came to a climax when the speaker talked about the customer's control of the messaging. And I was like, oh, that idea is a pretty good permanent note. And so that's how I kind of like look at it, is like, what is the like interesting idea or keyword that I would want to like kind of take this information and reassemble it some way in a note. And so that's how I came up with this over here. And typically what I do is I just, for syntax purposes, it's just a double square bracket and then like the name. Now, yes, like people that are familiar with the rest of my Smart Notes, there's like these prefixes and numbers and stuff. I don't worry about that at all until I have the note finished. And sometimes the note will sit finished for days in the root directory. And I set it in the root directory just to annoy me and remind me that I should integrate it in the knowledge base. But that's kind of the beginning process. Any questions with that, Jess?
No, that was a good point to make, though, is, I feel a lot of times I stumble up when trying to take notes because I think so structurally. So if I didn't have like the categorization system figured out already, I procrastinate in actually, starting a note. So I like that you said that, whenever you get started, you're just, focused on the actual content you're creating rather than the organization and structure that comes after. And inevitably your instinct annoys you enough to get to the point of organizing it. So I think sometimes folks like ourselves focus too much on the structure and organization of things, and it kind of pushes out, and some of those fresh thoughts might be lost by
Mhm.
doing so.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of batching, and so
Yeah.
that's what I typically do is like I'll get like right now I use to-dos as well instead of like an inbox. And so if you look in my tags, I've got 2 to-dos, and then I started like tagging to-dos with more urgent, like today. So that way like I would actually go and do it. But I
That's a good
usually do
point.
batch the to-dos on a weekly basis. So I guess to get started with the literature note, I kind of kick-started it because this takes time. I've had some notes take me 45 minutes, and so I've actually started to use time blocking as a means to limit the amount of that I'll think about a certain thing, because you can't just spend all day thinking about writing one particular note. The end goal is the integration of knowledge.
Right.
But a lot of times people try to delegate this process by just like the literature note is good enough, right? They would go back to the literature note and they would review it. The problem is they haven't moved any of that knowledge from copywriting, or just copying or photocopying the speaker's knowledge into some kind of like articulate artifact, right? Like hopefully at the end of this, when I come back to our team and I discuss it, I'm like, oh, this customer controls the messaging is a really interesting idea. And I would, after having taken this permanent note, have enough memory recall or this note in front of me that I could articulate what I learned,
And
instead of like, go
I
ahead.
think like that is the favorite thing I've learned so far. Excuse me, from the system is this idea of the permanent note, because if you open up, like I used OneNote before, I had mentioned to you before, but if you open up my OneNote, it's going to look like the left hand side of your screen. And it's good because I'm still capturing, right? I'm capturing information and things that sound important. But what happens is when I inevitably, like for instance, if I had a customer meeting, my notes would still look like this. And whenever I would go talk to someone on the account team or something about the meeting, I was going through and scrolling through with, my eyes in that follow-up meeting, trying to remember what that, shorthand bullet point was about and why I thought it was important. So taking the time, I don't know why I never thought of it before, but taking the time to go back through that and put it into, like you said, articulate it into a way that you could either, pass along to someone else or help you remember what those bullet points were all about.
Mhm.
One thing I was thinking of, and I don't know if you do this or if you plan on doing this, but what I would be interested in is, have you ever gone back through your literature notes at a later date with a new set of eyes and see if there's any more insights you pull from it? And then at that point, would you add that to the same permanent note, or would you create a new one?
It depends on the idea. So
Mhm.
both scenarios are possible. Like in this particular note that I have here, there's probably several permanent notes that exist, but I'll probably only do one or two, just, one from time
Oh,
perspective and two from interest. But what's
so
interesting about, oh,
it's
go ahead.
not a one-to-one then,
No, it's
right?
not one to one. It's a one to many.
Okay.
Yep. It's a one to many. And the other thing is, like, say another literature, there was another, maybe we'll get to it later, but there were a couple talks that talked about a similar thing. And so those actually might be compiled into
Oh, nice.
one permanent note, or just add to it. Because the idea with the permanent note isn't that they're permanent, they're evergreen to a degree,
Yeah.
where you just append to them, as you learn more information. But
Oh, that makes sense.
so
Okay.
and this is all my understanding. I'm sure there's other Zettelkasten practitioners out there that will debate me, but that's my current understanding what's worked for me so far. But to kick it off,
So
the oh, go ahead.
can I
Yeah,
ask one question? So the permanent notes, they're more topic driven than like you're focusing on a single, important.
they're meant to be an atomic idea. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, single idea in there, not to like it's to compress and elaborate on a single idea
So
versus. to condense all knowledge in one particular literature note to a thing.
Okay. So for instance, like you mentioned that it was really interesting to you, this customers control messaging. So I would imagine after the conference, you're probably gonna, go do a little research on it to learn a little bit more. So you'd probably at that point say you find a blog or a book about that mentions it. Would you then create, start the process again, create a literature note for that new source, and then work to integrate it into this permanent note and append it to that? So at the end of the day, you might have 6 or 7 different sources around a topic or around an atomic idea, and it's all combined in a one page.
Yeah, except for you want to have your literature note, your permanent notes, be constrained to a certain character count, like 500 or 250 or something like that, because in the original Zettelkasten, permanent notes were restricted to an index card. So if you just
nice.
index card, if your handwriting is really small and not horrible like mine, you might be able to get away with like 300 to 500 words tops, maybe. I don't know. I haven't done the math, but for me, it's probably like 300 words max, maybe 250. And so that's where I try to keep a lot of my notes to be concise. Now, where my mind goes with this customer control messaging, I don't know where it'll fit yet. I just think it's an interesting idea. Where I go from a utility perspective is, I write Terraform docs, and Terraform is obviously a partner and a competitor. But if you look at the customer controls of messaging, you look at that lens, what sparked in my mind is I should be including relevant and useful Terraform links inside our documentation. Because the customer actually controls that messaging, and so the more useful and the more satisfied that customer is, that's actually a better metric for the documentation than purely linking back and forth to MS docs. And so that's where it went to. Yeah,
I that's a great thought. When they were talking about this, and I was in on that session as well for the conference, my thought went to, when they talked about, linking to, competitors and stuff, my thought went to AWS or Google Cloud, right? But maybe more so it would be useful using that thought to have some of my articles. I do Python, so linking back to snippets of info from the Python org, itself, since it's open source and everything, but they have their own, set of documentation themselves. So maybe referencing that would help as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as long as it's all, and that was like another idea in this and several other talks was, focusing content on satisfaction versus heuristic metrics, right? Like page view and stuff like that, and how they're different to gauge. But I guess to get to the matter of the permanent note, again, I was just kind of reviewing and scanning, reflecting on the literature note, and that particular piece stuck out to me. So then I created the note that you see on the right. And then in the very beginning, you can see it's kind of just a little bit of a reword to this next follow-up note that I had. So the literature note was, consumers are not just buyers, they're the community. And that was from a slide that the speaker had. And then I kind of reworded a little bit to, customers aren't just consumers of your products, they're its community.
I like
that makes sense because it sets up the argument, now that I'm thinking through this, that marketing started on this product. It was about the price. Then it moved to kind of the what, having choice. Then it moved to the why, like, why would you invest it? Who are the types of people that purchase this product, right? Like appealing to a personality. And now it's about the who and the emotion. And when it's about the who and the emotion, community becomes far more important in your marketing, right? And I think that's what the speaker was trying to get to. And so now I'm giving that little transition story that I had in these bullets that were on the slide to remind me of that, right? So I want to be able to forget this information and come back to it in a single note and not have to review source or literature or reference notes. And so that just that sentence of that story helps remind me and set that up, that this is the current state that we're in this, in this marketing transition, good or bad. So now, like, it's probably towards the end of it where I need to come to a conclusion. So, like, what does it mean to have the customers in control of the messaging is like the next unanswered part of that idea. And that's going to require a little bit of thought.
Yeah.
But let's see.
So let me ask a question.
Sure.
The process, correct me if I'm wrong here, it looks like you scan through and you review your notes from your literature note, right? So you go through it and you find like the first thing that kind of pops up as, hey, this is a concept that I want to, it's important and I want to create a permanent note on it. And it's almost like you picked out the one note, the little bullet point, the sentence that your eye went to, and then everything under it is supporting that.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm trying to form it into an idea that, with a supportive body of text. Yep.
Okay. Awesome.
So now, like, the next thing that kind of pokes out to me is this 80% brand, 20% product.
Mm-hmm.
So I could, maybe start about like the now state where now a keyboard connects marketing is 80% about and 20% of the product. And that solidifies the statement above where it's talking about transition. And I could even just put like, therefore, because it's all about the branding. The branding is now about the customer, right? There's that blending between brand and customer is going to control the messaging, but I feel like there's a little bit more to that. Well, here's another interesting piece, right? So people choose brands because they go back to what they know.
Yep.
Reduces the decisions. So it could be, and this is, a lot of this is contextual to me because I've been doing a lot of other research around, like information overload and stuff like that. And I'm reading a book right now called The Paradox of Choice, which talks about this too. And so that's going to bleed in a little bit.
Good timing.
Yeah, good timing. That means I'm onto something. So maybe it's like, and I'm going to misspell things. I don't have spell checker in here. My whole idea with this is just to get ideas out. And so I actually found that spell checker was like horrible distraction because
it is
the best speller. So I'll come back through and do that. It's a separate thing. Overwhelmed by choice. People default to the brands they know and the brands their peers.
That makes sense.
Maybe like helping reduce the amount of decisions they have to make.
Yeah.
I think there's something still missing where, like, what is the impact of them controlling the message? And I think then it kind of ties into the satisfaction where marketing, maybe the ending clause is marketing.
I like that first sentence you have in your literature note, though, of people tell us what we want to hear, not what we need to hear.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Because if you think about it, that kind of talks to this as well. So, you have to think about, it's almost like you have to engage more because you're not going to get like, I think me and you talked about this yesterday, like throwing out a survey, optional survey. You're not going to get the best feedback, true feedback of your product, or in our case, our content, the impact of that from customers. But if you're engaging with that community, you're inherently getting feedback, and they're not looking at you at that point as, oh, this is a Microsoft content dev who's doing a survey and wants to know about his content. No, this is Josh. He happens to work at Microsoft and he happens to own the content, but they think of you as Josh. You know what I mean? And that's going back to the community too, though, rather than a product. because in the past, like Satya says this all the time, right? Microsoft was perceived as, sometimes be wanting to be the smartest person in a room. Well, that environment has changed, right? Now the thing that we do is just try to learn and listen, active listening, engaging, trying to solve solutions, not trying to prove that our product is the best or trying to prove we know all the answers. It's more about integrating with that community and understanding, there's the struggles or pain points that they might be dealing with.
Well, it leads me to think, so this is what I was talking about earlier. So, in my own efforts, community is like kind of the only way that I feel comfortable marketing in that way. And that's
Yep.
to get back to a community. And so what I thought about with this, which it's a really good thing. So if you think about a lot of the permanent notes too, is like what the literature notes spark. It's not all going to be in the literature notes. And so just from my own context, like so when I make purchasing decisions, I'm either, first tier decisions are peer, and the next tier is community, right? Different
Yep.
communities that I'm a part of. And then if your product gets super big, like it has its own community,
Yeah.
And so maybe that's kind of the end here.
I like that kind of progression, because I was just looking at buying something, and so I asked around. I did the same thing as you. I asked my friends that have common interests or own what I was looking for. And then I went to the internet, I went honestly to Reddit, and went to the topics there that related to what I was looking into, smart home stuff. So I went there, start reading through, what they were saying about what I was looking at, and that. But yeah, definitely, like once I could see what you're saying, because like once I'm newer to the smart home thing, so like once I establish, oh, they've earned my trust, I like their products, they're dependable, I won't go through that process again. I might go through it to get ideas and then go back to that brand that I have committed to, essentially, to see if I can create what I saw from my peers with their products without having to go to a different brand name. So I like that idea of you're kind of initially getting recommendations and doing kind of, the legwork of figuring out, okay, what am I going to buy, and then once that's established and almost that brand has proven itself to you, it's more you're getting ideas from your peers at that point rather than trying to find what is everyone else doing and buying, if that makes sense.
That completes the circle. So if you look at it from the marketing perspective, it's transition, and then you compare it to today's decisions of how you purchase, like that's actually the full circle, where because of the onslaught of information that we have today, our decisions, we have a availability bias with all the information that's in our head. So we're going to go to brand names that we see all the time. But in decisions that are a little bit more important, what we'll do is we'll look at peers and we'll look at community. And it's because of where the consumers are looking for information is why the control is now at the customer level, because the customers are in the community, they build the community, and therefore they actually control the messaging of your product, because the people, your future clients and customers, are actually looking to them and not to you.
Yeah, yes.
So,
and if you didn't have that community, though, you know what I mean? You could see how that would
right?
It would impact it, right? Like,
good point.
It would horribly impact it, because if you take community out of that equation, so say I was looking for, I don't know, a smart bulb, okay? And Josh said, hey, I have a Philips Hue and I like it, okay? And I went, now everyone knows Philips Hue, right? But let's say they didn't. And I went to Reddit, smart home subreddit about smart home gadgets, and I do a search and start scrolling through, and I don't see anyone mentioning it. I would be like, well, do I take that gamble, or do I go with what's being mentioned the most in the community, and try that out? Because if one person, unless like, it's someone that you truly like, most of the time when people give me suggestions, I still do research. Like I don't blindly say, oh, they got it, so I'm gonna go get it. And if my research, if I don't find it mentioned or I don't find good reviews about it, I don't buy it. You know what I mean? So the same goes here. If you remove that community aspect, if you remove your involvement in the community, and that's a very good insights there, that the community is your advertiser, your primary advertiser, because people trust other people. They don't really trust when they see an ad from a brand, right? Because you're not going to ever put out an ad that says, well, this product's cool, it has room for improvement, but you should still buy it. You know what I mean? Like,
Getting the full
yeah,
truth, so to speak.
exactly. I like that.
So, decisions move from peer recommendations to online communities and reviews, meaning that the messaging of a product is in the hands of the consumer. So there, kind of closes the loop, and it's a little reminder, and it's not fully fleshed out. I've gotten in a little like snuff where I've like tried to perfect the note, and here this is what happens when that occurs. So there's this really neat idea that I learned. It's called habit is 10 nature. Okay. So writing, the whole thing is in that note, and this is like a 400 word note because it was, I think it's like 30 pages of a book. And so I tried to extract all in there, but this is what happens when you try to perfect a note. I don't recommend it. I think it's a decent note. I think it's good, but there's probably more than one idea in here. But I like that. This is usually where most of my notes kind of come to, around 100, 120, 150, at most 200 words. And it does, it kind of crystallizes the idea, like kind of what's some background story, what's the general theme, and the keyword is really important. So in Smart Notes, they have, the term of a keyword in the Zettelkasten and physical, and it was just like a little note on the card, because all the cards were actually just numbers, but the actual prefix. So now I'm good with that note. I'll probably, I'll put the to-do tag in here, and I'll integrate it later, because I found that those are separate thought processes. So now that I'm in the mode of writing and taking notes, I'll go and continue to take more notes, and I'll let this kind of float there. And then I'll do a pass later in the day or maybe tomorrow where I move them into the Zettelkasten, and I develop that idea into the slip box, and I put the prefix and figure out where it goes.
Now, let me ask you a question here. So I'm looking at your literature note, okay? Because we just kind of wrapped up this, and I was tempted to tell you, hey, we should mention, this last statement here, this last summary feeds into a lot of that reptilian brain idea. But I'm wondering, would it make sense to make another permanent note around the 6 reptilian brain?
Yeah.
And then how would you link those, though?
So,
or would you?
Well, you would, because I think so. Where my mind goes with this 6th thing is maybe marketing to the reptilian brain, or reptilian brain marketing might be the key word, right? Because we're talking about emotion, and the speaker talked about in the talk where, kind of like these different phases of marketing, they target different areas of the brain, and now we're at the point where we're talking about the who, and we're talking about emotion, and that's controlled by this, the reptilian part of the brain. She outlines it in these 6 things here, why that's true and how you can appeal to that as a marketer in your content, right? And so what I would do is, usually when there's like a word that tags into it, what I'll do is I'll create a link in it like this, and then you can actually do a pipe. So then when you go into preview mode, you just see the word, but then in the editor, you'll actually see the actual note itself, like the card. So we'll just put Julian Brain, right? And then I can click into that and I have a new note. But
Oh,
then
nice.
preview, I just have the word emotion. So because emotion sparks that new note, they are linked, they're very similar, because now I'm more elaborating on, like how that marketing's done.
I like that. Okay.
Now the notes are kind of linked, and I have all three, and I can start my other note. And again, I would do the same thing. I'm not going to worry where it integrates, where it fits into my knowledge base, what topic. I'm strictly just going to take these 6 things, and I'm going to try to get them down into a note. And maybe there'll be bullet points even too. I don't have to. Everything doesn't have to be these perfect little paragraphs that tie into each other and tell a story. Sometimes it's just enough to have the reminder, and then I might even put the screenshot in there too, as a gentle reminder. Now, the last thing that I will say that I do is I do add a source. So at the top, I typically do something like this.
Oh, to link it to the literature note.
Right. And because it's already, if I go into backlinks, because I put this inside here, this links it to it, but it's a backlink, and I like it to be front and center. Like what's the source? I don't want to have to click if you go over to here and you go to links, you can see that it's backlinked because it's referenced here. But I find that trouble, navigationally, it's more of a pain. I'd rather, I want to go back into here, and so I can click that particular note. So yeah, I mean, that's the whole process
Awesome.
of taking the permanent note for me. If there's any questions, please let me know. But weird call out. Thanks for watching.